Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh at Abe Greenwald is the executive editor of Commentary, is one of the regulars on the Commentary podcast. Abe, this morning I was listening, and David Barry's new book came up. I heard everybody rave about it, but it reminded me, I can't talk to comedians. I have no ability to talk to funny people, and I froze when I was introduced to him, but I will read the book anyway. I like your recommends a lot. I just finished talking to David Mamet for 45 minutes. He is of the opinion that anti-Semitism is skyrocketing and getting much, much worse. Do you agree with him?
I think there's no question. I think it's an objective fact, yes.
How much worse can it get in the United States?
Well, that really is the question of the hour. In some way, when we had the shootings last week of the two young employees of the Israeli embassy in Washington, um, it seemed, of course, horrific and shocking, but also inevitable. Hasn't everything that has happened in terms of pro Hamas, pro terrorist activism in this country since the very moment that Hamas launched its war of extermination on Israel on October 7th, 2023, hasn't everything been geared toward targeted violence against Jews? And you have this in combination with a kind of culture of worship on the left of violent figures, talking about the guy who shot the United Healthcare CEO. And now there is also support, particularly from the American socialists, um, hoping to free the shooter of those two young Israeli embassy staffers last week. So the lionization of this kind of violence and of the perpetrators of it um, lays the ground for copycat killings. And we should say clearly the line has been crossed from terror supporters, which is what these pro Hamas activists have always been, even though the legacy media would describe them as pro Palestinian activists, but they were always nakedly, unapologetically pro Hamas, pro terrorist activists. The line has been crossed from terror supporters to terrorists. And that's one of those barn door situations, I fear.
Now, Abe, I want to make sure my list is complete. The leftist who tried to kill every Republican congressman, I don't know that he was anti Semitic, but he was a violent leftist. The would be assassin of Kavanaugh, violent leftist. The would be assassins of Trump, violent leftists. I don't want to be guilty of a failure of imagination, though, by stringing together 5 events, 7 events of violence from the left and not imagining how bad anti Semitism can get in the United States. I don't want to be one of the silent Germans. How bad do you think it can get?
I think it can get extraordinarily bad. I think, look, we see, if you look back on 2015 in Paris, there was a kind of jihadist siege in several
Yes.
stages of the city, and that has happened in European cities to varying degrees at different points. Um, I don't think we're quite there because, in part, and this is something that is sort of novel about what's happening in the U.S. Um, the the people or persons who are killing in the name of a free Palestine, while chanting Islamist slogans in the US are not necessarily Islamists themselves, which is unlike what we've seen in Europe. They are leftists who have been instrumentalized by this Islamist cause, and uh, worked it into their own leftist theology, which is not unlike what we saw in the 1960s among the leftists who worshipped Marxist paramilitary groups in, say, Latin America. Um,
Or Baader-Meinhof
so
and the Red Brigades. Yep.
Absolutely, absolutely. The left always comes to around to the arms of the country's worst enemies. It doesn't matter if they're Stalinists. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the Castros. It doesn't matter if we're talking about Che Guevara, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about jihadists. They will find their way into the arms of America's worst enemies, all on their own, and that is what's happening, and um, it's quite a moment. We are not approaching the moment. We are dead in the moment, and I think that needs to be recognized.
Well, you don't need recommendations from me, Abe, but if you read David Mamet's new book, The Disenlightenment, he is with you. And my you don't need any addition. If you do a symposium on how bad it could get in America, I'd read every page because I don't want to be guilty of a failure of imagination. I just sometimes think I have too much confidence in our political system that we would reject the overt appeals to anti-Semitism, but we haven't yet conclusively. Mamet and I talked today when I was interviewing about the book. He thinks they've been beaten once, but he quoted Victor Davis. They have to be beaten repeatedly at the polls. Do you think that's going to happen?
I think that plays a big role in it. I also happen to think, and I think this is an underappreciated point, that Israel finishing the job in Gaza will do a lot to send American and Western Jew haters back into their hidey holes. Because don't forget, the pro Hamas, pro terrorist crowd came out chanting jihadist slogans, not when Israel responded to the slaughter of October 7th, but when that happened, when Hamas massacred Jews and Israelis on October 7th, because for them, this was about exploiting a moment of weakness. And when Israel looks strong and takes the upper hand and changes the state of play to one in which, oh, the Jews aren't weak. Maybe this window of opportunity is closing for us. They go back and hide. So I have a firm conviction that Israeli victory will do a great deal to push back the violent anti-Semitism in the U.S. and around the West.
I hope you're right because I think that victory is coming. Abe Greenwald, follow him on X at Abe Greenwald. Listen to him on Commentary Podcast 5 days a week. Thank you, Abe.